Greetings, most gracious audience. I am Sir Persevere, Knight of Tesar.
And I am Speckles, a salamander of Tesar and Sir Persevere's talking animal sidekick.
And I am Klingeon, Tesahorn of Tesar and Sir Persevere's personal mount.
And I am Aveline, Tesahorn of Tesar and wife of Klingeon.
Today, we shall continue with the second installment of our in-depth review series of the Swan Princess 1994.
In the previous episode, Prince Derek had made his infamous colossal blunder and screwed up his chances of marrying Princess Odette after finally falling in love with her.
But, as we also saw, Prince Derek was on the road to recovery and doing his utmost to redeem himself after his thoughtless mishap. Even now, in the span of what seems to be just a couple of weeks since the tragic death of King William, the entire kingdom of Chamberg has given up all hope of ever finding Odette, presuming her dead at the claws and jaws of the great animal. The entire kingdom, that is, except for Prince Derek, who has shown great resolve and perseverance in his decision to not give up on his ladylove.
Nicely put, my friends. Let us now proceed with part 2 of our film analysis and see how things play out from here.
Most certainly, Sir Persevere. We fade over to the next scene, and we find ourselves back at Rothbart's castle during the nighttime. This is the part where we really get introduced to our favorite animal sidekicks, as we slowly zoom in on John Bob and Speed. I cannot help but notice that as the scene opens with Speed chuckling and John Bob commanding for his silence, the two animals stand completely stationary, not moving at all with the aid of animation.
Given how small they are in this shot, I'm sure it would have been difficult to really effectively animate them here. Besides, it's more to establish the setting than to actually show some movement.
Maybe so, but it still feels like a cop-out. However, we quickly cut closer to the two cold-blooded animals before most people have the time to notice the discrepancy.
You've come up with some dumb ideas, John Bob, but this one is a doozy. Observed Speed in a voice which many have compared to the eternally gloomy Eeyore.
"Huh! Go ahead and laugh," replies John Bob. "I'll get her to kiss me, and when she does..."
And when she does, poof, you'll change into a prince. Speed finishes for the frog. I really love his bored sarcastic delivery with this line. I know, you've told me. The turtle continues as the frog nods emphatically. During this exchange, we've seen John Bob hard at work assembling some cattails together into a single flexible pole structure. And now we learn what it is exactly John Bob has planned as Speed gestures to some nearby purple flowers. Why don't you just give her these flowers? These are pretty.
Oh, they are pretty flowers.
I'll get you a bouquet of these flowers when we finish this review, my love.
Oh, Klingeon, will you truly?
Yes, indeed, my love. You are worth it.
Well, I hate to rain on your parade, you two lovebirds, but John Bob doesn't consider those flowers to be worth his time and energy. Ha! What a love dunce! I don't want these flowers, I must have those, the frog replies as he adds another link to his cattail pole. He points toward the castle dungeon, where we see another bouquet of flowers.
I'm at a loss. What's so special about those flowers? They appear identical to the ones we were just looking at.
It is at this precise moment that the two alligators guarding the moat have decided to poke their heads out of the water as if daring John Bob to try to get past them.
When she learns that I have risked my life for them, the kissing will not stop. John Bob continues as he hops onto a tree branch with the aid of his newly made pole. She? You don't mean that John Bob actually expects Princess Odette to kiss him, do you? Ew!
It is in the character of Jean-Bob that the Swan Princess pays homage to the classic fairy tale known as the Frog Prince. In this story, however, Jean-Bob is but an ordinary frog who is deluded into thinking that he is a human prince under enchantment.
Aveline, you might remember my ancestor, Sir the Salamander. The story goes on that he was deluded into thinking that he was a human knight under enchantment when he was really just an ordinary salamander. Yes, Sir Sal was a gentleman to a fault, even if he was crazy enough to think that he was an enchanted human knight. But the wizard who had kidnapped my friend Leandra had also toyed with Sir Sal's brain with magic, and Sir Sal's psyche was affected by the magic spells for a while afterwards, even when he escaped from the wizard's clutches. As you can tell, Jean-Bob was an inspiration to my family tree. Jean-Bob falsely thought that he was a human prince while my great-grandfather thought that he was a human knight, both of them assuming that they had been reduced to amphibious states by magic. But that's also where one of the differences kicks in, because my great-grandfather eventually broke out of his enchanted psyche and remembered that he was actually a salamander whose brain was warped by magic to make him think he was a knight under enchantment. And Jean-Bob, as best as we can tell, maintains his position of enchanted prince to the end of the movie and beyond.
Also, Jean-Bob has been designed to have an exaggerated French accent, whereas you and your family have exaggerated posh British accents.
True, that is another fun point of difference between Jean-Bob and my kinfolk.
Back to your question, Aveline. Yes, Jean-Bob, thinking that he's an enchanted prince, wants Odette to kiss him so that he can become a human again. Of course, he might have more luck changing into a prince if she threw him against a wall, but that's besides the point. Anyway, in continuing the conversation, Speed states, and then you'll change into a prince.
Precisely, Jean-Bob answers.
Mind if I point out a problem? Speed asks.
I don't take advice from peasants, Jean-Bob retorts dismissively. Yeesh! What a conceited, self-serving frog! That's another difference between my family and Jean-Bob. In thinking himself a prince, Jean-Bob thinks he's better than everyone else and wants everyone to serve him. Back when my great-grandfather was around, Sir Sal, thinking himself a knight, was eager to serve others selflessly for the sake of his knighthood. And although I'm not under an enchantment, I still look up to the example of my great-grandfather and want to serve others above myself because it's the right thing to do.
Good for you, Speckles. That's one reason why you're the best talking animal sidekick anyone could ask for.
And what about me?
Klingeon. Speckles may be my talking animal sidekick, but you are my brother-in-arms. We played and grew up together, and we have fought and bled alongside one another. Nothing will ever change our bond of brotherhood.
And I feel the same about you, my brother.
Very good. In resuming the dialogue in the film, Speed replies, "Suit yourself," to the high-minded French frog. In a rather hilarious show of animation, Jean-Bob rolls his shoulders while preparing his makeshift cattail pole for the big jump. The two alligators likewise roll their shoulders in order to loosen their joints to more easily catch Jean-Bob.
Flowers, kiss, concentration, Jean-Bob whispers encouragingly to himself as he prepares for his big launch.
And we see the alligators licking their chops. I must also say that I'm impressed with the reflexes Speed displays as he does his utmost to avoid getting hit by Jean-Bob's pole. I'm especially impressed that Speed was able to roll onto his back and then regain his feet, considering the fact that turtles tend to get stuck if they flip over.
Just curious, asks Speed innocently as Jean-Bob dangles from the end of his pole. How are you going to get back?
Only now, at the end, does Jean-Bob realize that he should have taken advice from Speed and actually listened to the well-meaning turtle. Even here, anyone with half a brain can see that John Bob could have terminated this foolhardy mission with neither harm nor foul. He could have just simply let go of the pole and plopped to the safety of the ground. But no. Instead, the frog panicked, lost his capacity for rational thought at that moment, and gripped onto the pole for dear life. And away he goes, vaulting past the moon and slamming his pole directly into the jaws of one of the alligators. The pole snaps as the alligator bites down on it. He manages to get away from that alligator before hopping onto the nose of the other alligator. The pupils of the second alligator narrow as the frog prepares to jump away. Fortunately, John Bob hops away as the second alligator lashes out. He makes it back to shore and finds himself on top of what remains of his pole. Thankful to make it back in one piece, John Bob begins to kiss the ground. The pole bends beneath him, pulling his body away from the earth, but his lips remain firmly suctioned to the ground for a brief period of time, resulting in this priceless desktop background of exaggerated animation physics.
He looks a bit like a mosquito in that image, but instead of sucking blood, he's sucking dirt.
Be that as it may, John Bob's face quickly goes back to normal, and he looks behind to see why his pole is bending him skyward. From his upside-down vantage point, the frog can see that the alligators are the ones pushing down on the other end of the pole, forcing his body to levitate. Poor John Bob rockets past the moon and lands directly into the mouth of one of the alligators.
And it is here, my friends, where I would like to focus on this particular alligator who caught John Bob. I believe this character was designed to pay homage to one of Dawn Blue's characters.
And which character would that be?
Only the most famous alligator character in classic animation history, King Gator from All Dogs Go to Heaven.
I thought Louis the alligator from Disney's The Princess and the Frog was the alligator inspired by King Gator.
Louis is not the only alligator to be inspired by King Gator, and he certainly was not the first alligator to pay homage to King Gator. As you can see, King Gator has an uncharacteristically huge set of lips. The same goes for this unnamed guardian of Rothbart's moat. Out of the two alligators in The Swan Princess, this big-lipped King Gator lookalike also tends to be the less intelligent one. As for Louis, there are different traits he shares in common with King Gator, as Louis does not have big lips. They are more similar in terms of location and personality. Both Louis and King Gator live in New Orleans and love music, be it singing or playing a trumpet. But I still maintain that this alligator, in terms of artistic design, is more similar to King Gator than Louis. You may continue, Speckles.
Very good, sir. The King Gator lookalike catches John Bob in his mouth, but the other alligator is not happy about missing out on the snack, and so bites down on the mouth of the King Gator lookalike. Immediately, the snout of the King Gator lookalike swells up like a balloon from the pain and pressure of the other alligator biting down. This all results in John Bob literally popping out of the jaws of death. What ensues next is sheer hilarity as John Bob alternates between falling back to land and going back out to the water on the end of his shaky pole. Bless his heart, Speed tries to catch John Bob, but his reflexes are too slow in rescuing the frog. In the end, John Bob slams directly onto Speed's shell before once again rejoining the alligators.
Mercifully, however, John Bob flops back to shore one last time, as he shrieks for Speed to "Grab me! Grab me! Hold my arm! Hold my leg!" Speed looks past John Bob and smiles. John Bob, likewise noticing that he suddenly stopped flopping back into the water, smiles with a most toothy and sheepish grin.
But of course, it is Odette who has come to the rescue. Why else would John Bob react so sheepishly?
Right on the money, Aveline. I'm going to let this clip play out. The comedic value of this moment never gets old.
Oh, thank you, Odette. Thank you. Let me have that. Silence, you savages!
It's always good to see John Bob's showboating personality backfire on him. Be that as it may, Odette has taken him under her wing in friendship, so I would not be too harsh on him if I were you. As John Bob lays there stunned by the pole, Odette sweetly asks if he is alright.
While Odette is asking this question, I cannot help but notice Speed rolling his eyes. He's probably thinking to himself, "Of course he's fine. You baby him too much. He's a reckless idiot who's going to get himself killed one of these days."
As it turns out, John Bob is alright. Hopefully a little wiser from this scenario, but I doubt it. Odette asks what on earth John Bob was trying to accomplish with his shenanigans. Speed attempts to explain what happened, but is cut off short by John Bob shushing him. John Bob bends a knee and confesses to Odette, "I wanted to get to those flowers for you." The camera cuts to show our three friends from another angle. The flowers that John Bob wanted to get from the other side of the moat are included in this shot. Odette, being as clever as she is beautiful, winks as she answers, "You're being sneaky again, John Bob." "What sneaky? You deserve a nice bouquet," John Bob replies as he hops onto a big boulder sitting next to Odette.
And you deserve a kiss.
John Bob, ever the ladies' man, puckers his face in such a way that he resembles a fish. "Well, all right," the frog eagerly states before falling off his perch. "You know I'm under a spell," Odette reminds him. Not knowing when to take a hint when it comes to the wishes of a lady, John Bob persists with, "But my kiss will break the spell."
"Give it up, John Bob," Speed groans. It is now at this point that Odette reveals the full nature of her enchantment, specifically how to break the spell. So far, the only hint of breaking the spell that we have seen is the ultimatum Rothbart gave her when we first saw Odette in her swan form. Basically, we as the audience so far are led to believe that the curse will only go away if the princess agrees to marry Rothbart. But there is another way by which the spell can be broken, and Rothbart must have explained it to her off-screen in order to show the hopelessness of her situation. Please continue, Aveline.
Odette begins to explain, "I can only kiss the man I love, and then he must make a vow of everlasting love, I know." John Bob cuts in with impatience. "And prove it to the world," Odette finishes. Exasperated, John Bob shouts, "What do you think I was doing with the flowers and the alligators going chomp chomp?" Odette asks for Speed to help John Bob understand why she can't just go around kissing strange frogs or men to break the spell. To this, Speed simply replies, "I'm only a turtle." Odette's curse ironically promotes good virtues. Not the part about being turned into a swan against your will, mind you, but this remedy that has been outlined in order to break the spell. How rare is it to find a virtuous lady these days who will not kiss any man outside of her family who is not her husband before marriage? How rare is it to find a good man nowadays who is willing to make that vow of everlasting love and prove it to the world? Alas, such individuals are as rare as Tesahorns as far as planet Earth is concerned.
True, but Tesahorns are also abundant here on this continent of Aquilus, along with plenty of virtuous God-fearing men and women.
I take it, Klingeon, that you still believe that Odette still loves Derek even after she turned him down following "This is my idea"? Because we must remember that Odette has already kissed Derek just seconds before Derek made his big blunder, which was followed by Odette calling off the marriage. Otherwise, if Odette still doesn't love Derek, this makes her criteria for breaking the spell into a topic of awkward discussion with the next man whom she will truly love this time.
That is correct, Speckles. As I stated then, Odette deeply loves Derek. She just wants to be sure he is truly ready to marry her.
I agree with you, dearest husband. Before we go on, I have a question about this scene here. This is the first time we see Odette talking to Speed and John Bob. I know that they only made a brief appearance during Odette's first scene as a swan, and so would not have had a chance to talk to her then. But we see the princess talking to these animals here, which is something we have not seen demonstrated before. Where on earth did Odette get this newfound ability to talk to animals? It's not like she's been talking to her horses prior to her enchantment after all. Are there other humans in this universe who can talk to animals? Does Rothbart know about this?
I think you just answered your main question, Speckles. Prior to her enchantment, Odette was a mere mortal who was unable to carry conversations with animals. But Rothbart has now put her under a spell which has turned Odette herself into a swan. It is in this form as a swan that Odette gained the ability to talk to animals.
But Odette is a human in this scene, thanks to the moonlight on the lake. How is she still able to talk to Speed and John Bob in her human form? And why don't we ever see Odette talk to the alligators and possibly gain their alliance?
These are questions that I wish had been at least addressed in deleted scenes. I imagine that in her swan form, Odette was shocked when she first heard Speed and John Bob calling to her from the shore. She probably couldn't believe it when she heard animals talking for the first time, and it probably took a day or two for her to get over the shock. But the turtle and frog probably reassured her that they were friends, that they saw what had happened between her and Rothbart, and that they would do whatever it took to help her, with John Bob being a bit self-serving on his part when making that promise. I will say that Brother Bear handled this concept much better in terms of a human entering the animal world. They had an entire scene centered around Kanai's sudden ability to understand and talk to animals once he became a bear. As for why Odette can still talk to Speed and John Bob in her human form, I say it's for the same reason that kind of thing occasionally happens even here in the land of Tesar. Once a person has been enchanted into a non-sentient animal, that person will always possess the ability to talk to non-sentient animals, even if the person is eventually freed from his or her enchantment. Which, of course, is what happens to Odette even at the end of the film. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. And then you mentioned the alligators, Speckles. This is another loose end that I wish had at least some thought given to address it, even if it wound up only being a storyboarded deleted scene on a DVD. As it is with John Bob and Speed, the alligators themselves are ordinary animals. As we will see much later in the film, even the alligators have been somewhat anthropomorphized when it comes to their interactions with the other animals, even to the point of understanding what the other animals say to them. But why do they not speak to our protagonists? If they were truly villainous characters, they could have been taunting Odette and her friends and telling them that Rothbart will win. You might be able to argue that the King Gator lookalike was too stupid to talk, even by animal standards. He is portrayed as being dim-witted when compared to the other alligator. But what's the other alligator's excuse? Why doesn't he talk? And why doesn't Odette at least try talking to him at the beginning? There is only one possible explanation, and I must confess I'm grasping at straws even with this. But it might be connected to the fact that the alligators don't make much of an attempt to eat Odette herself until close to the end of the film, choosing instead to primarily target Speed and John Bob for consumption. It is my theory that Rothbart placed a spell on the alligators. Perhaps not necessarily to make the alligators lose their ability to talk. In fact, whether Rothbart knows about talking animals or is able to talk to animals himself is a topic we'll have to address later on in this review, given his own ability to turn into the great animal. Rather, Rothbart might have placed a spell on the alligators who guard the moat in order to keep intruders away from his castle, as well as putting a spell on them that would restrain them from attacking Odette, whether in her swan or human form. Whether Rothbart knew it or not, such spells upon the alligators who turned them into mindless guard dogs might have taken away their normal capacity for talking with other animals and Odette. But again, this is only my theory as a fan trying to fill in the blanks on behalf of Richard Rich, and a rather flimsy one at that. Thank you for these excellent questions, Speckles. It is now at this point that the third musical number begins. Far Longer Than Forever is the title of this song. Of all the scenes of the Swan Princess 1994, it is this part that stands as my favorite scene of the entire film. Throughout my long years of lonely wanderings and seeking for my own wife, this song was a source of encouragement and hope in an increasingly dysfunctional world. In fact, when it comes to the American tradition of selecting a song from a film to be the background music during the Unity Candle or Sand ceremony on their wedding day, it was the Nerdy Knight who requested that this song be the music for this very special moment, and his wife was sweet enough to oblige him. With this personal testimony, dear audience, let us now break down Far Longer Than Forever. Aveline and Klingeon, would you do the honors?
It would be our genuine pleasure, Sir Persevere. Odette rises from her seated position, walks toward the lake, and sings, "If I could break this spell, I'd run to him today, and somehow I know he's on his way to me. Derek, you and I were meant to be." Meantime, we see Speed slowly following Odette. John Bob, who is leaning against Speed, is not too happy to see the turtle not staying in his place. That's classic John Bob for you, thinking he's so much better than his fellow animals. I will also concede to your point, Klingeon. Even though she turned Derek down when he made his big "what else is there" blunder, Odette still loves him. She just wants to make sure he's a true gentleman who can appreciate her as a virtuous woman both inside and out.
Thank you, Speckles.
Odette, now walking down a set of stairs and twirling her dress, continues with, "Far longer than forever, I'll hold you in my heart."
Ah, nothing like good old-fashioned animation showcasing the graceful movements of a beautiful lady. You won't see movies being made these days that show truly feminine women in beautiful dresses and happily twirling around in them.
Yeah. All we get these days are millennial women in G's screaming adulting sucks in lackluster animated ketchup commercials. I'm sorry, but I couldn't help but point out the stark contrast between Princess Odette and Princess Hines.
Considering that we are trying to help people appreciate true feminine beauty again, I think that this observation is appropriate. Please continue, Klingeon and Aveline.
Odette reaches toward the moon and continues with, "It's almost like you're here with me, although we're far apart."
The camera pans away from Odette and goes back to Derek in Chamberg. Derek, far apart from Odette and unaware of the fact that she is singing at that moment, sings as if to join her, "Far longer than forever, as constant as a star. I close my eyes and I am where you are." As he concludes this line, we can see that he is holding the heart-shaped swan pendant he had given to Odette as a baby. He tenderly wraps his fingers around it, signifying that he wishes to hold Odette close and protect her even as he is doing so with the pendant. We go back to Rothbart's castle as Odette sings, "As sure as the dawn brings the sunrise, we've an unshakable bond." Even as this line is sung, the night fades into morning.
It would be rather hilarious if the sun really did rise while Odette was singing this song, and then we would see her finishing her lines in her swan shape.
As we will see with the remainder of the song, it is still night at Rothbart's castle when the singing has concluded. I think the fading to morning right here was just to illustratively play into, as sure as the dawn brings the sunrise, rather than having a literal sunrise.
I quite agree with your assessment, my good sir.
The camera pans into the starry night sky above the castle. Derek sings his next line, destined to last for a lifetime and beyond. The camera then both zooms and fades several times into the stars to try to demonstrate the infinite love they have for each other. We return to the castle at Chamberg, where the camera is hovering above one of the upper chambers. Prince Derek emerges onto the balcony and sings, "Far longer than forever."
Accompanying him back at Rothbart's castle, Odette likewise sings, "Far longer than forever."
I swear that I'll be true.
I swear that I'll be true.
I've made an everlasting vow to find a way to you.
Far longer than forever, like no love ever known. And with your love,
I'll never be alone.
far longer than forever.
Much stronger than forever.
And with your love, I'll never be alone, concludes Odette, thereby ending the song. In comparison to the other song breakdowns that we have done so far, this one was the shortest and sweetest yet. Though in fairness, not a lot was happening as far as action was concerned. But with this song, there is one elephant in the room to address.
And that elephant would be...
Derek and Odette weren't in the same vicinity. How on earth did they sing the same song and with such perfect synchronization?
That is the kind of question you could apply to every musical movie with a broad brush, be it this film or The Sound of Music. When it comes to musicals, you have to suspend disbelief when it comes to people just magically knowing the lyrics of a song never sung before and the whole world seeming to stand still and come together to sing that melody. However, in this case, I would say that this song in particular is an allegory. The hearts of Derek and Odette, although separated by a great distance, were still joined far longer than forever by the cords of the truest love. And when Odette sang out, Derek's heart felt her heart, and he was compelled by an unseen force to sing an accompaniment to her song. Speaking for the nerdy knight, his heart yearned to find his own special lady, and he hoped that her heart would yearn for his. Two faithful and lonely hearts still seeking for each other and singing a love song that spanned both time and space until the day they should unite in marriage. This song helped give him hope during his many years of singleness, to remain in his virginity until the time came to marry his own true lady love. If more men and women could live in such hope, to swear to be true to each other for far longer than forever, this world would doubtlessly be a better place.
I too felt thus when a tear died in battle and I was set adrift without a rudder. My heart likewise yearned for a new love, and I found my Aveline. Her heart was calling for mine, and my heart was calling to her, even if I did not know it at the time.
Well spoken, Klingeon. My heart, of course, found its way to my own Lady Zhao Ying, and it was love at first sight. Of all the scenes of this film, this one always has been the scene that shined with the most beautiful truth of them all, and it will always remain my favorite part of the movie. But now the time has come to continue on with the story. It is just when Odette concludes her cosmic duet with Derek that the final talking animal sidekick of the film quite literally drops in.
I know that we have briefly addressed this scene earlier when we were discussing the Uncle Rothbart theory. I know that you don't believe that Rothbart is actually Odette's uncle, and I think you presented some good evidence to the contrary. But what about the other part of that excerpt? Do you think that it was, in fact, Rothbart who shot Puffin, or was it just a random nearby hunter who fired the arrow?
Oh, now that's a good question, Speckles. There is some good evidence both for and against the idea of Rothbart shooting him. As far as the evidence supporting the theory that Rothbart shot Puffin, we can examine it now. The proximity of both Puffin and the archer to the castle. I cannot imagine that after having been shot through the wing, Puffin would have flown very far. If Rothbart was indeed the one who shot Puffin, he likely would have done it while Puffin was flying by as Odette was in the middle of her song.
Really? That's all the good evidence you can think of for Rothbart being Puffin's hunter?
Pretty much. Honestly, I think there's more evidence against the idea of Rothbart being responsible for Puffin's arrow wound. First of all, where is the motive? Why would Rothbart shoot Puffin? Puffin didn't even know about Odette at the time, nor would Rothbart even suspect this Puffin as someone who could pose a threat to his plans. Maybe he did it just for some wasteful target practice, but that seems unlikely.
Let's be fair. He could have shot Puffin because he felt like having the bird for dinner, or using some of Puffin's organs as ingredients in his wizard's potions.
But as we'll see later in the scene, that's never brought up. Second of all, we never even see Rothbart handle a bow and arrow throughout the movie other than to throw Derek's bow into the lake. I doubt Rothbart is even a competent archer, particularly by moonlight. But we do see Rothbart pointing his fingers and zapping people with magic energy. If he was going to shoot anything at Puffin, it would be more likely with magic from his hands than with a bow and arrow. Third, if Rothbart had shot Puffin, I think the bird would have been a bit more enraged and vengeful toward the wizard upon seeing him. Of course, it's also possible that Puffin didn't even know who it was that shot him in the first place, given that he was shot at night, and most hunted animals are shot before they can even see who it was that pulled the trigger. But Puffin views Rothbart as an enemy for Odette's sake rather than for his own sake and sense of vengeance. For these reasons, I don't even agree with the theory of Rothbart being the one responsible for firing the arrow into Puffin. I think a random hunter was responsible for shooting the Puffin through the wing. This random hunter either subsequently lost track of where the wounded Puffin had flown to, or didn't wish to explore Rothbart's foreboding castle. But don't take my word for it. Let us now resume with the film and see for ourselves what plays out. We go back to Puffin with his left wing crossed over his chest, making it appear as though he had been shot through the heart. "Do you think he's dead?" asks Speed.
No, it's just his wing, I think, replies Odette. Strange-looking bird, adds John Bob, lifting Puffin's head. With a look of disgust, John Bob just as quickly drops the bird's head with a not-so-gentle thud. Odette, once again showcasing her sweet and caring personality, gently grasps Puffin's wing and declares, "Poor fellow, you must be in a lot of pain." Addressing her cold-blooded companions, she adds, "You better hold him."
As John Bob grabs Puffin by the beak, Speed plops down on top of the bird's belly and lets the princess know when they're ready. Odette grabs the arrow and snaps it in half.
Oh, come on, John Bob! Puffin isn't even that loud when he yells in pain! Good night! You'd think he was screaming loudly enough to wake the dead based on the grimacy Frog is making. In a further demonstration of the virtue of kindness, Odette rips off part of the hem of her dress and uses it as a makeshift bandage with which to wrap Puffin's wing. John Bob pulls open one of Puffin's eyelids and announces, "Hello, this is your wake-up call."
I am pretty impressed with the blurry vision animation that they used to show the world from Puffin's perspective as he woke up to see John Bob speaking to him. But it is also at this point that Puffin decides to go from 0 to 60 as he springs into action. Honestly, what Puffin does next is more hilarious empty bluster than intimidation. It is true that Speed and Jaw Bob get knocked back as Puffin springs to his feet. But after that, Puffin is just hopping around in various karate poses without actually utilizing said poses on his perceived adversaries. He makes a kind of karate chop posture in front of Odette before turning around and facing the frog and turtle. Speed pulls his head into his shell, and Jaw Bob is quick to also crawl into Speed's shell. And then Puffin does a small kicking somersault into empty air.
As Puffin finishes his somersault, he declares in a Scots-Irish accent, "It takes more than a pair of pond punks to keep Puffin down. Hi-ya!"
I'm also impressed by the use of animation blur to showcase Puffin's rapid movements.
And what's going on with Speed's shell? It looks like both Jaw Bob and Speed are using the turtle shell as a kind of tank, and they're looking out the top hatch.
It is merely another hilarious animation gag. I wish they still made movies like this. This kind of gag simply doesn't look as good in Tumblr scribbles, CGI, or photorealism.
Wait, I'm your friend, Odette informs the crazed Puffin.
Puffin, not even taking a moment to ponder how they are able to understand each other despite the species barrier, turns to the princess and says,
"If you're me friend, how come you have an arrow in your hand? Ah ha ha! Yes, the exact kind of arrow I have."
I think it's rather funny when Puffin tickles Odette's throat with the arrow.
As does Odette herself, I might add. The energetic Puffin becomes dumbfounded in mid-sentence as he examines his wounded wing, now bandaged up and decidedly lacking an arrow. He even pulls back his feathers to reveal a scrawny arm as he searches for the missing weapon.
It would have been more convincing if there was still a bloody wound on that arm. So what? Only his feathers got hurt by the arrow and not the actual flesh beneath the feathers?
Given that the primary intended audience was children, you can't really expect for them to stick with that detail entirely consistently. Besides, they played up that gag for laughs.
True enough.
Puffin pushes his feathers back into place like a sleeve before looking on both sides for the arrow.
"I took it out while you were laying there," explains Odette.
Puffin asks, "You mean you had the chance to—" And here, he makes a slicing motion across his throat before continuing with, "And instead you—" And it is here that he makes a motion mimicking the act of pulling the arrow out of his wing.
Odette simply answers with a nod while saying, "Uh-huh."
Taking a bow, Puffin declares, "Madam, I apologize." He then rises to a salute and formally introduces himself with, "Me name is Puffin, Lieutenant Puffin."
Lieutenant, eh? What on earth did Puffin do to earn such an illustrious rank? What battles did he fight? What troops did he lead into battle? What war stories and memories haunt him at night as he rolls over in his nest with PTSD?
It is a backstory that will forever remain enigmatic. But if I had to make a guess, Puffin's backstory was probably akin to a Legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Ga'Hoole. Most likely, an evil Puffin was taking over the coast of Ireland until a noble young Puffin stood up against the warlord's shenanigans. And our Puffin in this movie might have served as a lieutenant on the side of the good Puffins. Even after order was restored among the Puffins, however, our hero still yearned for adventure and flew to parts unknown until he was shot down and wound up here with Odette.
Are you sure about that?
Hey, it makes for a better story than Puffin not really having any excitement and flying off to Japan like it says in the decidedly non-canon bonus features. Even that story doesn't explain how Puffin earned the rank of lieutenant. According to the bonus features, he simply went to Japan, learned martial arts and the culture, and then flew off and eventually met Odette. So yes, Speckles, I am sure about that. Puffin's real backstory is an untold enigmatic tale of war, tragedy, and adventure, not some peaceful traipse off to Japan. But now let's resume with the film. The following clip is pretty funny, so I shall let the film speak for itself here as Odette returns Puffin's salute.
It's a pleasure, Lieutenant Puffin.
Oh, you'll want to thumb your nose, Mr. Frog Prince who thinks he's better than everyone. As far as I'm concerned, you belong in the psych ward for harboring delusions of grandeur. Puffin might be deluded himself, but at least he's a heroic fighter, much akin to my own great-grandfather, Sir Sal. My opinion aside, the random gesture does fit John Bob's personality, and the randomness of the gesture is rather funny, as is Speed's reaction. Extending her hand to Puffin, Odette continues to introduce herself. I'm Odette, Princess Odette. Puffin kisses Odette's hand before she goes on to introduce her friends. And these are my best friends in the whole world, Mr. Lorenzo Trudgealong.
Friends call me Speed, the turtle explains with a polite bow to the bird.
When it is John Bob's turn to introduce himself, he is not nearly as gracious as his turtle compatriot. I have no friends, only servants, and they call me Your Highness.
Speed apologetically whispers to Puffin, thinks he's a prince.
Turning away from John Bob's hand, Puffin gives out a cuckoo whistle. He then clears his throat and continues with, I owe you, princess, and I intend no saying until me debt is paid.
I don't think there's much you can do, answers Odette. He has me under a spell.
What? You mean a magical...
The poor Puffin is like, did I do that? Rest assured, Puffin, it was not your magic that conjured up the flower. Magic glistens around the scene as Odette rises with a look of angry determination. While Puffin shuffles around in a state of confusion, Speed tucks his head into his shell, and John Bob gets out of Dodge as fast as his frog legs can carry him. The ruins around them, transformed by an illusory spell, revert back to their former magnificence. The trees are now in bloom. Night has turned to day. All of these, of course, were merely illusion spells, but not true transformations. Or else Odette would have turned back into a swan by now. Puffin is absolutely bewildered by the magic that has taken place. He stands there gawking with a pair of huge bug eyes while taking in the scene. Speed and John Bob, having witnessed this magic before and knowing what it means, are not so hypnotized. They reach out and yank Puffin out of sight. Appearing from behind an arch, Rothbart enters the scene in a full suit of golden armor while carrying the helmet. His counterfeit crown sits upon his head. I might add that he looks relaxed and does not give the impression that he just shot down a Puffin. He does not seem flustered at the idea of shooting down a bird and yet not being able to find his wounded target afterwards. Nor, in fact, does he even bring up the missing Puffin to Odette. But let us continue with the tale. Your knight in shining armor has come to set you free. He laughs mockingly as he bats away a couple of his own illusionary songbirds he conjured up. Odette turns her back on him and crosses her arms.
Let me ask him.
Chill.
And just like that, Puffin stops. If he had known for sure it was Rothbart who had shot him, I doubt he would have listened to Speed in the heat of his boiling sense of vengeance. Again, it makes more sense that Puffin was shot by a random nearby hunter, and he stops at Speed's behest because he's more concerned about Odette than about himself, with no evidence given of Rothbart's culpability for his injured wing. All it takes is just one little word, continues Rothbart to his stubborn captive. He bows to one knee and asks, Will you marry me?
Odette, still standing strong and refusing to yield to the wickedness proposed by Rothbart, gives her unwavering answer. Every night you ask the same question, and every night I give you the same answer. I'll die first. To the women out there who might be watching this review, Odette gives a proper demonstration of feminine strength. It does not come by wanting to be strong like a man. That is a man's job. The true strength of a female comes by standing on the principles of virtue and not compromising in the face of evil. As we have already discussed, Odette has two options when it comes to breaking her spell. Either bravely hold out for a virtuous rescuer, no matter how long it should take, or take the easy way out and accept the wickedness of Rothbart for her husband. The sad thing is, whether women in real life realize it or not, far too many of them accept Rothbart instead of waiting for Prince Derek. So far, however, Odette has maintained her virtue and is on the righteous path of waiting for Derek to save her.
Masterfully put, Aveline. In the meantime, Rothbart is none too happy about Odette's response. Even as the princess gave her answer, Rothbart had protested with "no, no," and "don't." Once Odette has finished speaking, Rothbart rises in anger and allows his spells of illusion to fade away. His armor even vanishes, revealing his sorcerer's cloak we have always seen him wearing. Only the helmet that he had been carrying remains. He proclaims, "You're really starting to bug me."
I should think you'd be used to it by now.
Such a classic and memorable line. Chef's kiss to Michelle Nicastro for such a brilliant delivery. I love the wit and sarcasm she displays here. Enraged by her refusal, Rothbart responds with the equally memorable line of,
That's it! Just keep pushing it. But someday, I'm gonna boil over!
Have you ever noticed that when Rothbart's face turns beet red, his chrome dome does not change color?
I have noticed. I think it is a rather funny animation mishap.
Odette, undeterred by her captor's anger, replies, "Go ahead then, but I'll never give you my father's kingdom."
I do admire her feisty determination on display here. Rothbart is left momentarily speechless in the face of her eloquent refusal. He turns away and ponders his response. Finally, he regains some composure and turns back to Odette. "I was hoping you'd say you'd be mine, but it looks as if you need another day to think about it," he finally answers. He points toward the sky as he finishes his response, prompting Odette to likewise turn around and look heavenward with despondency upon her face. Unfortunately for the princess, the moon is setting, signaling the end of her time as a human.
"No," whispers Odette to herself as she trudges back into the lake in defeat.
Rothbart laughs with wicked delight as his spell once again reclaims its power upon its victim. Standing in the shallows of the lake, Odette weeps as the swan spell encases her in its cocoon of transformation. As before, I cannot help but deny the mesmerizing beauty of the watery shell surrounding her. Ultimately, we see the dark outline of Odette's swan form plunging into the lake, signifying that the transformation is now complete. She is quick to surface with a flap of her beautiful wings before settling down and floating upon the water. Odette looks back toward Rothbart with a tear in her eye before blinking it away. The wizard turns and kicks the illusionary helmet he had conjured earlier, which was the only illusory item that had remained when all others had dissipated. But now, as the helmet flies away from the force of Rothbart's kick, it too finally disappears into nothing in a shower of magical sparks. As the wizard exits the scene, Puffin, still bug-eyed with disbelief at the magic which had been thus demonstrated, rubs his eyes and walks to the edge of the lake. He only says, "Princess?" Speed and John Bob look at him as if to say, "Yes, it's sad, but you'll get used to it after a few nights." The scene fades away to black as Odette floats on the water in misery.
You know, it's been rather fun role-playing as the different characters whenever we aren't playing brief clips. I may not like his overinflated ego, but playing a British version of Jaw Bob is growing on me.
I'm quite pleased you enjoy the role-playing aspect of our review.
Indeed, good sir. I will say that I can see why you don't think Rothbart shot Puffin. There's no hinting to that idea whatsoever in the film. As you stated, Rothbart would have been in a bit of a bad mood if he had shot down a bird, but then couldn't find its body afterwards. Maybe if Rothbart had seen the Puffin with its wing bandaged, we can make a better assessment of Rothbart's guilt based on his reaction. But Lorenzo Trudgealong and John Bob saw to it that Puffin stayed out of sight, so we can never really say for sure. Before we continue on to the next scene, I have but one other question.
Ask away, Speckles.
I know that in order for Odette to transform back into a human, she has to be on the lake whenever the moon is shining upon it. But when it comes to the vice versa, this is what Rothbart himself had said, and I quote, "As soon as moonlight leaves the lake, you'll turn back into a swan, no matter where you are." My point in bringing up this inquiry is simply this. If she doesn't need to be on the lake in order to turn back into a swan, why on earth did Odette decide to get her dress wet and walk into the water? She could have just turned into a swan on dry land and just saved herself the trouble of getting her clothes wet.
That's a fair question. My answer would be that it's probably psychological conditioning by this point. In her mind, Odette is so used to having to be on the lake in order to become a human, she just allowed herself to also develop the habit of being in the water when becoming a swan. Plus, she's also used to her clothes getting wet whenever she turns into a human. How much difference does it make the other way around?
I suppose it doesn't make much of a difference. Let's carry on to the next scene, my good sir.
Excellent. The next scene we fade into has Queen Uberta admiring the crown that Prince Derek will wear upon his coronation as king.
Yikes! I think the animators had way too much fun playing around with Uberta's reflections in the gems.
Hey, I'll take this over Adventure Time Tumblr scribbles by a country mile any day of the week. But yes, Klingeon, this was probably one of the few scenes aside from Puffin's hijinks and Wesley the musician where the animators were allowed to let loose and have some fun. Would you care to play Uberta's lines, Aveline?
It would be my pleasure, Sir Knight. Ahem. Beautiful. Simply beautiful. Gushes Uberta over the crown as her reflection is warped in the purple gems. Soon, Derek will be married, and the kingdom will have a king again.
As Uberta completes her statement, we pull away from the crown, where the animation is decidedly back to its regular style. We can also see that the Queen has been talking to Lord Rogers. Rogers shakes his head as the Queen is speaking before giving his answer. I doubt it. Derek still refuses to be king unless he finds Odette.
Oh, poppycock, replies Uberta with a sneer as she puts away the crown. All that will change at tomorrow night's ball.
Tomorrow night, eh? Speckles, do me a favor.
Yes, sir?
Pull up the image of the moon from the previous scene when Odette is turning back into a swan. What phase is it?
The moon appears full, sir. Why?
Trust me, it will be important later. Anyway, we can also see that Uberta and Rogers are in a room full of crowns. Good night! I thought just one crown was passed down throughout the lifetime of a dynasty. How many crowns does this family even need? But before we have time to really reflect on the excesses of the monarchy, the Chamberlain barges into the room. They're all coming to the ball! Ha 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 ha! He exclaims jovially. As he speaks, two other servants enter the room, each one of them carrying a bag of envelopes which get dumped on the diminutive Chamberlain. Every princess is coming, the Chamberlain concludes, popping his head out of the envelopes.
Yeah, well, we're really up to our ears in paperwork. Yeah. What happened? I don't know.
Laughing like a silly hen, Uberta exclaims, Goody! Oh my! Oh, this is wonderful! Picking up some of the envelopes, she turns around to Rogers and continues with, You see, Rogers, one of these is bound to change his mind.
Oh, absolutely not. Rogers replies, taking care to ensure Uberta does not hear his dissenting opinion.
Turning to the Chamberlain and bopping him on the head with some envelopes, Uberta commands, "Do not lose one."
Oh no. The Chamberlain acknowledges before putting on a simply gargantuan cheesy smile.
Where is Derek? Oh, never mind, I know where he is. Working on the mystery of the fat animal.
Yes, dear viewers. Her butt bounced like jello when she said the word fat. I thought you might find it as juvenilely hilarious as I did. But moving on. As you just saw in the clip, in the midst of her eagerness, she let an envelope escape her grasp. Rogers reaches to snatch the envelope out of the air and corrects her by stating, "The great animal, your highness." Leaping out of the envelopes in a massive flurry of paper, the Chamberlain first runs after the Queen before darting back to Rogers and snatching the envelope he had just caught out of his hand. He then leaves all the other envelopes behind as he runs back to the Queen.
You have to hand it to him. He takes his job seriously. I respect that.
As do I, dear husband. Uberta answers Rogers with, "Oh, big great, it's large and has fur."
And with that, we go to the Royal Library, where we see Derek scouring the books in hopes of finding any clues regarding Odette's abduction. Books are lying haphazardly all around the massive chamber, including the floor.
Bit of a slob, isn't he?
As the camera zooms in on Derek, the dying words of King William ring through the prince's mind. "Listen, Derek, it's not what it seems." What did King William mean? Asks Derek to himself as he ponders on the king's warning with a book in hand. He slams the book closed and places it on a growing pile of unorganized manuscripts. He then walks around the corner to enter another aisle.
Look at all these books! I'd love to have a library like this. Can you imagine how many videos we could make off of all these works of literature?
Perhaps you can visit Derek sometime and borrow some of his books. The prince briefly glances through another book before putting it back on the shelf.
He didn't properly put it away, but at least he didn't toss this one to the floor.
And then we see Derek sliding around on a ladder. That looks like fun. Now, where else have I seen this?
Well, it's my favorite. Borrowed places, daring sword fights, magic spells, a prince in disguise.
You know, Belle would love Derek's library too. Hey, maybe Derek could ask her out if he can't find Odette. They could probably bond over their common love of books.
Sure, Speckles. Sure. And I'm sure the beast wouldn't show up to try to rip Derek's head off his shoulders. Oh, now that's a good idea for a princely matchup. Who would win in a fight? The beast with his brute strength and animalistic prowess, or Prince Derek and his hunting skills?
My money's on the beast. You saw what he did to the other guy.
I don't know, Speckles. As long as Derek didn't get too cocky and kept a good distance between himself and the beast, he'd win pretty handily.
Boys, I think you're getting off topic here.
You're right, of course. Thank you for keeping us straight, Aveline. Anyway, sliding on the ladder, Derek reaches for a book with a green cover. Flipping through some pages, the prince's face slowly brightens as he discovers part of the answer he has been seeking. It's not what it seems. Of course, it's not what it seems. Now I'll find you, Odette, Derek exclaims excitedly as he closes the book. Bounding like a young stag, he slides down 2 ladders in order to reach the ground level of the library.
As Derek heads for the massive door, it slams open to reveal his mother, who is still holding envelopes from the previous scene. "They're coming, Derek," she announces with great enthusiasm. The prince swings his mother effortlessly out of the way before planting a kiss on her forehead. As Derek turns to leave, his mother asks, "Oh, Derek, where are you going?"
To find the great animal, answers the prince.
Oh, wonderful. Just make sure you're here tomorrow night, replies the queen.
Tomorrow night? Asks Derek.
The ball! Uberta stammers at a loss for words.
Mother, I can't, replies Derek as he glances at the green book in his hand. And then we see Uberta doing, as Derek calls it, the lip thing, wherein she looks like she's about to cry. Apparently, she has employed this tactic before to get her son to do as she asks. Funny enough, as she begins the lip thing, the envelopes she was holding before have disappeared from her hands. But when we zoom out from the queen's face, we see her holding envelopes against her mouth when just a few frames ago the envelopes were absent. This is another classic case of a lovable animation malfunction. At any rate, Uberta's lip thing works, because Derek's full quote goes as follows. Oh please, mother, don't do the lip thing. If I leave now, maybe I can be back in time.
And as usual, Sir Persevere, you are correct. Uberta was only doing the lip thing in order to achieve this outcome. Hearing Derek's answer, Uberta performs a complete 180. She launches envelopes every which way as she whoops for joy and says,
Thank you, darling!
As the envelopes fly in every which way, we can see the poor Chamberlain snorting in frustration. After all, how else is he supposed to make sure not to lose a single acceptance letter from the princesses when the queen is being completely careless with them? Derek turns to his mother once more and entreats, but please, mother, don't turn it into one of your beauty pageants.
Out loud, Uberta calls reassuringly after her son, Oh, no, it's just a few friends. And here, she turns quietly to the Chamberlain and finishes in a lower tone, and their daughters. The Chamberlain, I might add, who is still stressing himself out over those letters, that poor fellow.
Before we conclude this scene, I cannot help but notice how flippant Uberta seems to be at the mention of the great animal. After all, according to the reports, this great animal single-handedly killed an entire royal entourage, guards and all. And now she sees her son once again venturing forth to find the deadly great animal that an entire squad of soldiers couldn't kill. And she's acting as if he just told her he was going to Bromley's house to play a game of chess. You'd think she would have ramped up security to make sure she wasn't the next royal target of the beast. You'd most certainly think that she would first command, then implore, then beg with tears in her eyes for her only son and heir to the throne to not risk his life and limb to track down such a formidable animal. But no, she's far more concerned about the ball than she is about her son going out into the woods with a deadly predator on the loose. And on top of it all, the only escort Derek has is Bromley, who is by far the least qualified man to play bodyguard to the prince.
I do agree that Richard Rich could and should have done a better job in showing Uberta being fearful for her son's life. She does indeed seem to value his life too cheaply in spite putting all her hopes on him for the continuation of their dynasty. She seems forgetful as a goldfish regarding King William, and you'd think that she would still be shaken and paranoid in the aftermath of his death. Of course, the attacker was described as an animal, so Uberta probably isn't too paranoid about the great animal specifically targeting royalty. After all, most animals, even great ones, are incapable of intentionally plotting attacks that would topple kingdoms. She most likely figured that it was an unfortunate attack wherein a great bear killed King William and his soldiers before dragging off Odette to its den for dessert. But she could have at least had troops stationed along the roads in order to prevent another animal attack like the one that claimed William. I will theorize, however, and say that within the fortnight that followed the attack, security was heightened around Chamberg. Again, as Lord Roger stated during the archery practice sequence, Derek had already looked everywhere, and this had likely been done with a hunting party. During that initial time of panic and hunting, Uberta was probably more frightened and less flippant with her words. Security was probably increased around the castle during that time. But as the hunts turned up empty, and the great animal was not found, Uberta quickly allowed herself to fall into her old careless ways and was lulled back into a false sense of security, and the guard was probably reduced to where it had been before time. Furthermore, I get that she's trying to make the best of a bad situation, move on past Odette's death, and get Derek to marry a new lady. But for heaven's sake, my lady! Derek hasn't moved past Odette yet. You could at least try to give your son some time and space to heal before foisting a new princess on him. Did you not learn your lesson the first time when you were playing matchmaker for your son when he was but a boy? For once in your life, try to think about what's best for him. I know it's difficult to capture all the nuances of what's going on in an essentially 80-minute movie, but it would have been better for Mr. Rich to try to show Uberta actually fear for her son's safety and care for his emotional welfare than for me to try to fill in the blanks as to why she might be so flippant and careless. Not to mention her eagerness to just move on past King William and Princess Odette without much emotion, and in such a short time span. I appreciate the insight that you have brought to our attention, Klingeon. As Derek walks away from his mother, Uberta turns suddenly upon the Chamberlain. The poor Chamberlain, startled by the Queen, throws the letters every which way.
I want this to be big, says Uberta to the Chamberlain. Every princess must have her own introduction. Sheesh! Do you not have a concept of personal space, Uberta? Anyway, the Chamberlain replies, but you said... But before the poor Chamberlain can finish his thought, Uberta interrupts with, forget what I said. As she exits the library herself, she barks new orders to the Chamberlain. Now, send for the cooks and tell the band to start rehearsing. And I want 4 footmen for every carriage. Aha! Maybe 5. While she is barking orders, you can see just how stressed out the poor Chamberlain is by his job. First, the Queen wants him to keep track of every single acceptance letter sent by the princesses, a job already rendered difficult by the Queen's own carelessness with the letters. Now she wants him to coordinate everything for the ball in terms of the food and the musicians, and he has to oversee the arrival of the carriages containing the princesses. At first, he reacts to all this by mocking the Queen's yakety-yak-yak personality before sticking out his chin defiantly behind her back. It is only when the Queen turns around to face the Chamberlain that he immediately puts on a smile of cheesy proportions. When Uberta turns her back on him and heads for the stairs, he smacks his head against the floor several times. I would not advise you mocking the Queen at the risk of getting caught and likely losing your life, Chamberlain. But I do sympathize with the idea that you are likely being overworked and overstressed.
Don't waste your pity on him, Speckles. While the other citizens of the kingdom have to do lots of manual labor and hope that someday their taxes are lowered, he gets to eat to his heart's content at the castle in his spare time and doesn't have to do that much manual labor himself. He's just a glorified royal page boy, and anyone can be a page boy.
I suppose you're right. I guess Uberta's clueless behavior as pointed out by Klingeon has made me more sympathetic to the Chamberlain. Besides, it's not like he's that bad as far as Chamberlains go. At least he doesn't go around whimpering and conspiring to take over the kingdom like another Chamberlain I could mention.
Quiet!
Fair point. He isn't nearly as bad as that Chamberlain. Anyway, the scene ends with the Chamberlain banging his head, and we now return to Rothbart's castle. As we can see, it is still daytime. Odette, in her swan form, is conversing with Lorenzo Trudgealong, John Bob, and Puffin at the bottom of the ruined staircase which leads into the lake. Puffin is still grasping the magical reality of the situation he finds himself in. I love the delightful animated zaniness he displays as he asks,
Let me get this straight. You mean every night when the moonlight leaves the lake, you...
Right.
This moment right here is one of the reasons I love classic hand animation so much. You can pull these kinds of neck-stretching stunts with Puffin and not think twice about it. You can't pull off that same wackiness in live action or CGI without it looking like Puffin should be immediately carted off to the nearest hospital. Let me just ask the fine folks out there who would want a live action version of the Swan Princess 1994. Do you honestly want this scene depicted in live action CGI? Do you want to traumatize your kids with Puffin looking like some horror film character with a devastating and unnatural medical emergency?
Are there people out there who would want a live-action remake of this film?
You wouldn't believe how many, my fine Tesahorn fellow.
That, however, is a topic that we shall address separately from this film review itself. In answer to Puffin's question, Odette replies,
Right. The following night, if I want to turn back into a human, I have to be on the lake. John Bob, ever interjecting with his own agenda, snarks, All she needs is a little moonlight. Me, I have to be smooched. Oh, John Bob, you truly do not understand. The moonlight is but a temporary reprieve for Odette without actually breaking the spell. As for you, by your logic, all you need is a little smooch. But her? She has to be rescued with a vow of everlasting love by her true love, which you can never be. Let's not forget that John Bob is sorely lacking in the logic department. He's truly a frog. No amount of kissing is ever going to change that for him. But by all means, John Bob, at the very least you could respect Odette's wishes and try to find some other woman who will kiss you.
and John Bob will have to search for another lady for a long time because women who can talk to animals are very rare in this fictional universe. Anyway, after John Bob makes his self-serving interjection, Puffin comes up with a plan.
No fear. You fly to your prince. We bring him back to the lake. The moon comes up.
You change into a princess and happily ever after. Ho ho!
Puffin is easily the most theatrical character in the entire film. I love the look on John Bob's face in this shot, as if he's asking, what's going on here?
You have to admire the reach of Puffin's wing. Puffin flew on top of that pillar while John Bob stayed on the ground. And yet somehow Puffin was able to sweep John Bob up when the frog was easily out of reach.
Much like his neck when mimicking a swan, I think Puffin stretched out his wing about 6 feet long. The Looney Tunes logic is strong with this one, and I'm loving it.
How will I find him? Asks Odette.
Dropping John Bob, Puffin takes on a bewildered expression and replies, "Oh, you don't know where he is?"
I don't even know where I am, answers Odette.
I bet he does, interjects Speed, who points up toward Rothbart's castle.
It is John Bob who unwittingly stumbles upon a marvelous suggestion as he blurts out, "Oh, that's a great idea. Just say, Monsieur Rothbart, I'd like to leave now. Do you have a map or something?"
At the unwitting mention of a map by John Bob, we launch forth into our fourth musical number known simply as No Fear.
Not yet singing, but with the instruments beginning to play in the background, Odette brightens at the idea and says, "That's it." And then both she and Puffin simultaneously declare a map. John Bob, realizing that he put his webbed foot in his mouth, claps his hands over his mouth with a gasp. See, John Bob? This is what you get for running your mouth all the time.
Let's go back a frame or two. Yeah. Wow. John Bob's got some big bug-eye action going on. I think this is another shot where the animators had some fun.
Hey, for a movie where you're doing in-betweeners all the time for a high-quality hand-animated film, I can see why you'd want some fun on the job.
Indeed, Speckles. Odette then turns toward the castle and declares, "Let's do it." She then begins singing to the music. Aveline, if you would do the honors.
Certainly, Sir Persevere. Odette and Puffin fly to the castle and begin peeping in at the windows. The first room that Odette spies has a couple of tattered flags along with a shield hanging over the fireplace, and a book sitting on the mantelpiece. But otherwise, there is nothing of interest. Odette sings, "We're off on a mission, we're tough and good condition."
Puffin spies on another window which is covered in solid wood. Unfortunately for him, the window opens right at that moment to reveal Rothbart's hag sidekick. The act of opening the window flattens Puffin against the adjacent wall like a pancake. Naturally, the hag didn't even know the bird was there, and had in fact only opened the window in order to dump a bucket of water. The timing was just the worst for Puffin. As quickly as she had opened the window, the hag withdraws back into the castle and closes it behind her. "We're short," sings Puffin.
But standing tall, Odette finishes as she pulls him away from the window. "No fear," they finish together. As Speed watches Odette and Puffin from the ground, we can hear Odette sing, "There's danger all around us." Speed then turns around and spies John Bob attempting to tiptoe away. "They'd hurt us if they found us," states the Cowardly Frog in the midst of his tiptoeing.
Speed puts an end to John Bob sneaking away by pressing down one of his large front feet on John Bob's foot. As John Bob yelps in pain, Speed tells him, "Our backs are to the wall," which is followed up by everyone singing, "No fear." By the way, I will add that we once again get ourselves a wonderful freeze frame of big-eyed John Bob in the midst of his pain.
Odette and Puffin bounce off each other in mid-flight. Puffin, being a gentleman, steps aside and lets the princess pass him before resuming course. Odette declares, "'Cause we have all the courage we require."
Puffin boldly flies into the mouth of a gargoyle, only to be chased out a second later by a swarm of bats who probably didn't take too kindly to being disturbed in the midst of their midday slumber. The bird looks into an old bedroom which I theorize might have been Rothbart's personal bedchamber. He then flies past another gargoyle and peeks into a window above it. And then he flies to another window. While this is going on, he sings, "Take it from a frequent flyer." Unfortunately, he is then assailed by the same bats he had aroused in the gargoyle. And, Sir Persevere, are you fine with the next snapshot? It is simply scandalous.
You're talking about the fact that the bats knock all the feathers clean off Puffin? Sure, why not? He just looks like a plucked chicken. We'll just show the top half anyway. You know, I never froze the movie at this snapshot. I never really noticed the fingers that he has. That's rather strange, given that birds pretty much just have a thumb sticking off their wing and no other digit.
In Puffin's case, though, it does make sense for him to have fingers. After all, he does use his wings like hands. I was wondering if his feathers were acting cartoonishly without any muscle tissue, or if there were fingers under them. And now we know, and I'm glad they stayed consistent in regards to his design. It's more logical this way.
That's a good point, Speckles. I'll also point out that his fingers look like they could have been drawn by Dr. Seuss. Anyway, the shamefaced bird is quick to cover himself as best as he can. Oddly enough, gravity does not act upon Puffin in his featherless state to make him fall, but we'll also see why in just a few frames.
While Puffin is being thus humiliated, Odette sings, "Try your luck, our plan will fly, no fear." At this point, Odette peers into another window. The room in which she looks appears to be Rothbart's personal study. There is a table with a book and a candle on top. But there is something else above the table which causes Odette to gasp triumphantly. For over the table there hangs a map. She flies away from the window with all haste. A second later, we see both Odette and Puffin flying back toward the waiting Speed and John Bob, with Puffin once again covered in his full feathered plumage. Let me guess. We need to apply Looney Tunes logic to explain how Puffin just magically got his feathers back instantly.
Fortunately, I always keep a spare in my locker.
Yes, that is part of the charm of films such as this.
Sounds good enough for me. Carry on. It's hanging on the wall, in the upper chamber, declares Odette as she gracefully hovers in the air.
Landing in front of his cold-blooded friends, Puffin outlines his strategy.
Odette will keep a lookout while we get the map. We? Asks John Bob, making it clearly known that he is selfish and has no intentions of helping a lady in need. Way to show Odette that you are the kind of frog who clearly does not deserve to be a prince worth kissing, you coward!
My thoughts exactly, my good Speckles. Puffin, taken aback by John Bob's cowardice, sputters,
If you're not going to help us. Oui, replies John Bob, causing Puffin to take on a look of displeasure. He then launches into song and explains, this plan, if applied, will be simply suicidal. You'll be a sitting duck. And here he points at Odette, which is rather silly considering that she's currently a swan and not a duck.
Yes, but it plays into the phrase sitting duck, and she is the closest thing to a duck in the whole group. The other three characters gang up on John Bob and collectively reply, no fear.
Suppose that I do this, continues John Bob. Who knows if we'll live through this? Turning to Odette, he asks, how about a kiss for luck? Ah, John Bob, you never miss a trick, do you? However, to this request from the frog, Odette simply replies, no.
Speed and Puffin follow up Odette's refusal by saying, fear, which of course plays up to the constant mantra of no fear.
With Odette still standing alongside Speed and Puffin, she calls for the amphibian, our team is shy one green web-footed volunteer. John Bob, whose back is turned to the other three companions, glances over his shoulder and continues to voice his flat refusal. No way, Jose! No chance!
Speed shows up next to John Bob and overrides the frog's reluctance with a simple answer of no choice. Odette finishes the verse with no fear as John Bob finds himself being dragged up the stairs by Speed and Puffin on either side.
Seeing himself in this predicament, John Bob kicks and struggles while crying out, no, 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 stop it, no. Now, where else have I seen a frog or toad being dragged up these stairs by an animal friend on either side?
Grab him, Molly.
What are you doing? I said,
Come on, Toad.
don't me. This is an
Back
outfit.
inside.
I shall both get inside.
Ah, The Wind in the Willows, such a classic. You have good taste, Speckles.
I learned from the best, my good sir.
In continuing with the story, we fade from the struggle on the staircase and find ourselves inside Rothbart's castle. I'm not sure which door this is, but it's probably one of the side entrances to the castle, as it has only one door and not two like the main entrance is shown to have later. This door swings open rather easily. You'd think that the previous owners of the castle would have at least designed this place to have some doorknobs, or Rothbart could even use his magic to reinforce the doors to keep intruders out. Whatever the reason, all our heroes need to do is push open the door and they're inside. Odette remains the only one left outside in order to keep watch for either Rothbart or his haggish sidekick.
Puffin assesses the scene and sees that all is currently still.
All right, quickly.
He whispers to his cold-blooded compatriots.
As John Bob darts away from the door, Speed comments quietly, easy for you to say. The door closes on the turtle and pins him against the wall before he has time to get away, compelling him to say, ouch.
Puffin turns around to assist Speed out of his predicament. And John Bob, for all his selfishness and cowardice, actually follows Puffin back to help Speed without being asked or prompted to do so. I guess he does have a sliver of selflessness in him. If so, there's hope for him yet. While Puffin is yanking on Speed by the neck to pull him through, John Bob uses his legs to try to push the door open. Whenever I have to do something quick, I always bring a turtle, John Bob observes with a hint of annoyance.
For all his faults, John Bob is a funny character, and that has to be one of his most hilarious and classic lines in the entire film. After several painful pulls on the turtle's neck in which Puffin actually flexes some awesome muscles, the bird is finally able to pull Speed out of the door. All three of our animal friends are then launched away from the door by which they entered. They climb up a set of stairs and wind up in what has to be my favorite room in Rothbart's castle. I mean, just look at all those sweet suits of armor. I'd love to try them on myself.
Frankly, I think your suit of armor is better than any of the ones in Rothbart's Hall of Armors.
I appreciate the compliment, Klingeon. We zoom in on Speed, who moves his leg. His elbow squeaks like a rusty door as he states, "I think I pulled a muscle."
I'm gonna die! I knew it! Declares the dramatic John Bob as he slaps himself on the head. I'm on a dangerous mission with a lame turtle! You're gonna get us all killed! And of course, it is in this moment of accusation that John Bob winds up being the one to almost get everyone killed. For in his anger, he swung his fist wildly about and hit one of these suits of armor. I must say, John Bob is one very strong frog, for the force of his tiny amphibian fist actually topples over the suit of armor. The armor would have crushed him had it not been for Puffin flying over and preventing the breastplate from falling on the frog. Even so, John Bob has to hop away to avoid getting smashed by the falling helmet and battle axe. Of course, the foolish actions of the frog have now caused a ruckus which attracts the hag's attention.
Fool of a took. Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity.
Fortunately for John Bob, Speed, and Puffin, Odette is flying outside the very window which sits behind the hag. Using her bill, Odette taps on the window and draws the hag's attention away from the clamor in the Hall of Armors. The Swan Princess then flies to another window higher up the staircase and taps again, prompting the hag to run up the stairs to investigate the tapping noise. We go back to Speed, who has against all odds beaten Puffin and John Bob to the room containing the map. As Puffin and John Bob join him, the turtle smiles smugly and says, "Beat ya." Both the bird and the frog start backwards in surprise at the idea of a lame turtle having beaten them to the upper chamber. At that moment, Odette appears outside the window. And this is the part where our reunited friends resume singing the following lyrics. "We will take any dare that the other side will dare to dream up. We'll play tough, we'll play fair, but we're sure to win because we'll team up." While these lyrics are being sung, Puffin opens the window with his beak. John Bob climbs onto the table and finds himself looking up at the map. Puffin flies to the map and yanks out the pin holding the parchment to the wall with his beak once again. It must be noted that Puffin spits the pin out of one side of his mouth immediately afterwards. The map falls onto the table and rolls toward John Bob. John Bob tries to run away, but it is too late. The frog is pulled into the map as it rolls over him. Ultimately, the map is standing up on one end as John Bob staggers blindly around with his little feet sticking out of the parchment. John Bob wobbles on the edge of the table before falling off. Puffin swoops down and catches the map with his webbed feet before it can hit the floor. He then uses a wing to pull the map away from his feet and brings it to his mouth. He blows on it as if it were a trumpet, which launches John Bob out of the parchment. John Bob finds himself flying into a book which slams closed on him before falling to the floor. As it falls, we can see that it is a book of swan spells. It was likely this manuscript which Rothbart had studied from in order to grant him the power to put Odette under her current enchantment.
Out of a map and into a book. John Bob can't seem to catch a break in this scene, can he? Not that I'm feeling that sorry for him, of course. After all, this is probably the most book learning John Bob has had in his entire existence of self-entitlement.
He is having a hard time of it, to be sure. With the map now cleared of its amphibious burden, Puffin flies to the window in order to hand his prize over to Odette, who has remained outside despite the fact that the window is open. Before the map can be transferred, however, the hag appears between the two birds and slams the window shut. "Yikes," says Speed rather calmly.
Puffin, who has put the map back into his mouth, flies away with the hag hot on his heels.
Head for the door,
The bird commands, signaling that the time has now come for a strategic retreat.
John Bob, who has finally managed to open the spell book which had entrapped him, begins running. But at first, his attempts to run away are futile, as his churning legs simply cause the pages to turn. Maybe we should examine the pages that John Bob reveals while he is running. Perhaps we will learn some of the inner workings of how casting swan spells work. Let's see. We get a picture of the sun with 3 white dots sitting next to it. We get another sheet with a bunch of circles drawn on it. And then we get a picture of some random guy with a skinny curly mustache. Who on earth is this supposed to be? The writings on the pages are illegible, except for what appears to be perhaps a name directly under the random gentleman. Wait, that's not supposed to say Dracula, is it? If it is Dracula, that's the weirdest looking depiction of the famed vampire I've ever seen. After that, we see a picture of a cute little bunny. Above the rabbit, we can see the following caption, Rabbit or Beast? I know we've already discussed Looney Tunes' logic being present in this film, especially with Wesley acting like Bugs Bunny in his rabbit costume. But it is pretty cool to see the Swan Princess make another direct homage to Bugs Bunny himself, however small that tribute might be. We then get a page with a couple of yin-yang symbols along with some other symbol I'm unsure about. At any rate, it is at this point that John Bob finally manages to run off and away from the spellbook that had been serving as his makeshift treadmill.
At this point, in spite of the fact that Puffin had the head start and was flying in front of her, the hag manages to make it to the door and hem in the 3 animal friends. It is here that it is revealed that this song makes several anachronistic references to sports that have yet to be invented centuries later. Puffin lands between Speed and John Bob and acts as if they are about to play some American football against the hag, with the map serving as the makeshift football.
Alright,
He begins.
John Bob goes deep, Speed gets a handoff. Ready? Break!
Let's be reasonable, Klingeon. The Swan Princess 1994 was not the only animated medieval fairy tale movie to make a reference to modern American football. Anyone else remember the escapades of Lady Cluck in Disney's animated Robin Hood?
You have a valid point. Pretty much every major studio has made a reference to sports in their animated fairy tale films. And in terms of folks having problems with anachronisms and Quest for Camelot, the Swan Princess 1994 is certainly not as bad in that regard. But the Swan Princess 1994 also made several sports references back to back in this song, as we shall see in a little bit. Anyway, the hag allows a look of confusion to come on her face as the friends get ready to kick off the football game with the map, and I can't say I blame her there.
Get set, hut hut,
declares Puffin. And thus the game kicks off. Speed hands the map to Puffin while John Bob goes deep. Puffin winds back to make his throw, but then balks at the sight of the hag coming directly at him. So he tosses the map back to Speed, who catches the parchment with his mouth.
John Bob waves to catch Speed's attention and cries out, I'm open, I'm open. Using his front foot as a hand, Speed winds back and throws the map. The hag jumps up to catch the parchment but misses. John Bob jumps up behind her and catches it. Wah! The frog shouts triumphantly. That triumph is short-lived as the hag catches John Bob and squeezes him hard, causing his head to swell and his tongue to pop out. It really wasn't much of a contest. The hag rips the map from John Bob. She then throws the frog into the air and smacks him with the map as if she were playing a game of tennis. Oh boy! This is another sports reference, isn't it, Klingeon?
Indeed it is, Speckles. This is modern sports reference number 2. For Puffin is standing ready with his own tennis racket. He smacks John Bob back to the hag with the tennis racket and tells the frog to catch that map! John Bob flies back to the hag and grabs the map with all his might.
With the power of inertia from Puffin's racket, John Bob has enough force to wrench the map from her grasp and fly away with it. The hag looks on with a dumbfounded expression on her face. But that doesn't last long because immediately afterwards she is hot on John Bob's heels, who is now running for all he's worth. He hops over a stool, then over a chair, and then he hops over a railing. He finds himself plummeting through the endless depths of Rothbart's castle and screams in panic. Seriously, John Bob, what on earth did you think was going to happen when you jumped over that railing? You've done some dumb things before, John Bob, but not thinking twice about jumping over that railing was the most idiotic thing I could possibly imagine you doing. Now, young John Bob, you will die.
In spite of his foolishness, Speckles, John Bob will not die today. To the relief of the foolish frog, Speed swings by on a rope and says, "Saved ya," as he grabs the map with his mouth and thereby breaks John Bob's fall.
Okay. Really? Speed swinging on a rope saves John Bob?
Do you have a problem with John Bob being saved from a storytelling perspective? Should he just splat to his death?
No, that's not it. It's not the fact that John Bob's fall was broken, it's how it was broken. Richard Rich had a more logical method of saving John Bob at his disposal that didn't involve something as completely contrived as Speed swinging on a rope out of nowhere.
And that would be?
Puffin! Puffin can fly! He could quickly and easily dive bomb behind John Bob and save him. But Speed? When last we saw him, the turtle was still in the same room where the map was retrieved. How on earth could he possibly have moved quickly enough to exit the room, find a rope, secure it to an anchor, and then drop himself down after John Bob?
I get what you're saying. However...
I know. It's meant to be played up for laughs and pay homage to Looney Tunes logic. This is an animated film I shouldn't take too seriously.
That's right. We've seen worse, you know.
Yeah. Don't remind me about the monk from our Princess Mononoke review with those ridiculous stilt sandals. According to fans of that movie, that monk was supposed to be the anime version of Looney Tunes logic. Anyway, Speed miraculously appears on a rope and saves John Bob. They slide down the cord in order to reach the floor. And then they see the hag, who has somehow also reached them and is brandishing a broom. I must say, for someone her age, the hag is surprisingly athletic if she is able to run down a lot of staircases at the same speed at which Lorenzo and John Bob slide down that cable. Speed tucks himself into his shell while John Bob runs away with the map. It is at this point we get modern sports reference number 3, in which the frog hands off the map to Puffin as if he was handing off the baton in a relay race. As Puffin runs away with the map, John Bob pants and collapses from exhaustion.
Immediately back to back with modern sports reference number 3 is modern sports reference number 4. Speed gets Puffin's attention by calling out, "Hey, batter, batter, batter." The turtle even stands on his hind legs and resembles a baseball catcher. The hag steps up to bat with her broom. Puffin, standing atop an overturned bucket, pitches the map toward the two of them. The hag swings and misses. In this case, however, she doesn't get 3 strikes. She's out with only 1 strike. Speed pulls himself into his shell and the map wedges itself in the front end of his shell.
Puffin hops off his pitcher's mound, runs a victory lap, and declares, "Oh, the cloud's going wild!" As a matter of fact, we can hear cheering in the background, but we must assume this applause is only Puffin's imagination. In the meantime, Speed runs away with the map still stuck where his head ought to be. The hag attempts to hit the turtle twice, but comes up empty. Of course, the hag could just simply drop the broom and catch the turtle in order to pull the map out of his shell, but I suppose no one ever accused her of being intelligent. Puffin pulls a mop out of another bucket while some background singers sing "No Fear." And here we get modern sports reference number 5. Using her broom as a hockey stick, the hag begins to smack Speed around. Puffin chases after them with his mop. They skate around on the slick floor despite having neither ice nor roller skates. As Puffin catches up with the hag, we can see that he is positioned between her and the wall. The hag then body slams Puffin into the wall. Poor Puffin is a pitiful sight to behold once she has played foul in such a fashion. The background singers for the second time sing No Fear, as the hag launches Speed like a hockey puck with her broom instead of simply retrieving the map from his shell.
As Speed glides along, we go back to John Bob. He has been sitting on the sidelines, but now he snaps to attention as he sees the turtle shell hockey puck coming directly toward him. His eyes go buggy once again as he lets out a scream. John Bob attempts to run away from the runaway turtle shell to no avail. Ultimately, the frog is swept off his feet and goes for a ride on Speed's shell. Both Speed and John Bob slide up a wall, skate around, and then go back to the floor and glide in the direction from whence they came. While this is happening, the same background singers belt out, "It would be fine if one of us knew how to steer." The map, turtle, and frog find themselves sliding under the hag's dress. The wind generated by Speed lifts up the hag's skirt to reveal a pair of bright pink breeches. The hag once again appears dumbfounded as she looks between her legs to watch the animals make their getaway with the map. Puffin hops onto Speed's shell and hitches a ride with John Bob. Speed himself pokes his head out of the shell where his tail had once been. And with that, the three animal friends embark on the final leg of this adventure. They slide toward Rothbart's spiraling staircase and skate down it as if they were on a roller coaster ride. The hag places her broom across the railings and slides after the escaping animals. Mind you, she is perched precariously on that broom and isn't even sitting on it. If there are hypothetically any children watching this video, we would like to remind you to not try this at home. She plunges down a huge drop in the staircase. The animal friends are sliding along the side of the staircase, with the hag very hot on their heels and reaching for them. But the ride is nearly over, for the staircase abruptly ends as it is revealed to be broken. With the force of inertia, the animals and the hag careen off the staircase and fly toward a window. In mid-flight, the hag stands up on her broom and reaches for the animals, but she misses them. The hag's flight ends with her body going splat above the window. Her pretty pink breeches are out for all to see, and a ring of dust issues forth in the wake of her defeat. In the meantime, the animal friends fly straight for the window. With Speed's shell absorbing the impact, all three of them smash through the window and find themselves outside Rothbart's castle once again.
Forget the red shell. All you need is Speed's shell, and you're bound to win any Mario Kart race.
You can't escape me! What? Blue shell!
Well, even Speed's shell can't compete with a blue shell. Anyway, I think we should at this point recap the lyrics that have been sung prior to smashing through the window.
Fair point. While everyone was using Rothbart's stairs as a roller coaster joyride, Speed, Puffin, and John Bob were singing the following lyrics. Get a grip, get set, that's our best bet, no breaks, no sweat, and no regrets. And now we come to the part where our heroes smash their way out of a window. The good news is that they have escaped the hag's attempts to capture them and reclaim the map. The bad news is that they are in empty air high above the moat and so begin falling. The lyrics here are as follows. We're dead, sings John Bob. Not yet, replies Speed, flailing for all he's worth while the map is still sticking from his tail end. Oh no, not yet! John Bob screams as he pulls the map from Speed's tail and attempts to save himself with it by unfurling the parchment into a parachute.
Well, that's gratitude for you. Making a parachute for yourself while you just let your friend plummet to his death. And we're talking about Speed, the guy who actually swung to the rescue with a rope earlier to save the life of this ungrateful frog. John Bob has no concept of loyalty or repaying kindness.
It is a bit ungrateful, perhaps. But if you look at things another way, John Bob was quick thinking and resourceful. The objective is to get the map to Odette, and John Bob is doing his best to ensure that the parchment doesn't perish with speed in the water. Plus, John Bob is a lightweight little guy. He might not be ditching speed out of spite or malice. I don't know if this frog could both make a parachute with the map and use it to save both himself and Speed. In all likelihood, the turtle would be too heavy for the parachute anyway. You can only do so much thinking when you're in the heat of the moment.
I suppose you do make a point, but he's treading on thin ice with me. You may continue, sir.
Very good. Even while falling to his death, Speed gets into a praying position and beseeches the good Lord above for deliverance. Save me, he prays, and God does indeed hearken to Speed by sending Puffin. Puffin swoops under the falling turtle and catches him on his back. Even so, Speed is a heavy load for him. They tumble in a rough landing which ultimately results in Speed flying off Puffin's back. In the meantime, John Bob's attempts to save himself seem to be doomed to failure, as we can see by this look of absolute fear on his face. And indeed, he has good reason to be terrified, for the alligators wait below to have John Bob for a snack.
A fat lot of good it did for John Bob to abandon ship.
As the alligators fight over who's going to eat the frog, John Bob blows up into the map to try to keep himself aloft just a little longer. The normal alligator gets in a good blow which causes the snout of the king gator look-alike to get all twisted around. As the normal alligator opens his mouth and prepares to eat John Bob, Odette swoops by and grabs the map with her feet, rescuing John Bob in the process. The normal alligator snaps his mouth shut on empty air. As this transpires, and Odette flies away with John Bob, the song simply ends with 2 words: no fear. Now that the excitement is over, the map has been laid on the ground. We can see 2 kingdoms represented on the parchment. Odette points at the lower left kingdom that is titled Chamberg. There's Derek's kingdom, she informs her friends. This one scene, of course, is how I knew Derek's kingdom was called Chamberg and why I've been calling it by that name this whole time.
I assume the kingdom in the upper right corner is King William's former domain. Why does that not have a name on this map? Wouldn't that be important information for it to have? Why would Richard Rich not give the audience the name of the land from whence Odette hails?
That is an excellent question, Klingeon. Truth is, I have no idea why we never get to know what William's kingdom was named. Of course, one would assume that once their kingdoms were joined forever under the marriage of Derek and Odette, this new united kingdom would also be called Chamberg. But I have my own fan theory about the politics surrounding such a status quo. But such a theory falls outside of the scope of this review and warrants its own video, which I intend to make at some point.
I have one other question, if you don't mind. I see the 2 kingdoms, and it's all well and good that Derek's kingdom is on the map, but I don't see anywhere on here where Rothbart's castle is supposed to be, and Odette already confessed that she doesn't even know where she is. It's one thing to say that a country is on the map, but if the map doesn't tell you your starting point, then how are you supposed to know how to get to your destination, even if you have been at your intended destination before?
Another good point. Perhaps Odette was counting on the fact that she could use the map to guide her to familiar landmarks, such as the ocean, which could then help her triangulate the way to Chamberg. The fact that she can fly can help her compare her bird's eye view with what is represented on the map.
I think that explanation is a bit of a cop-out, but I suppose it's as good of an answer as we'll get.
I think so as well. Anyway, after pointing to Chamberg, Odette looks up cheerfully and asks, "When do we leave?" Apparently, not anytime soon, for Speed, Puffin, and John Bob are bandaged and looking mighty beat up after all the efforts they made in procuring the map at the risk of life and limb. And with that, we fade out and move on to the next scene, where we see Prince Derek unfurling a parchment of paper featuring a mouse upon a stone. "It's a mouse," observes Bromley as he bites into an apple. The great animal, corrects Derek, who is shown holding another rolled-up parchment in his hand. A tad small, wouldn't you say? Chuckles Bromley at the absurdity of the notion that a creature as small as a mouse could be the infamous great animal that killed King William and his entire royal escort. Yeah? Until it changes into this. Derek expounds, now placing the other sheet of paper on top of the mouse. Instead of a mouse, we now see an illustration of a dragon. This is the only reference to dragons we get in this film, and I cannot help but wonder if there had been dragons present at one point in Chamberg's history. But I suppose we may never know. Intrigued by his liege's suggestion, Bromley eyes the prince with curiosity. Derek continues, having finally partially solved the mystery of King William's words, "It's not what it seems," and how they apply to the great animal. An animal that can change its shape. A harmless creature approaches. Then, suddenly, it's too late. Derek flips between the sheets as he illustrates his point to Bromley. I think at this point, Derek hasn't even considered the notion that the great animal could be a human that changes into a ferocious beast. But I give full props to him for figuring out that the great animal does indeed change from one kind of creature to another. You mean it could be anything? Asks Bromley as a fly approaches him with the intent of landing on his apple. Anything, answers Derek as he mounts his horse. Bromley prepares to take another bite out of his apple, but then pauses and takes notice of the fly hovering right in front of his face. At any other time, he likely would not have even given the fly a second thought other than to absent-mindedly shoo it away. But now Derek's words are fresh on his mind, and Bromley now considers the possibility that every animal could be the great animal. With this new paranoia setting in, Bromley tosses his apple to the side and fumbles around to try to shoo the pest away. Ultimately, he falls off the log he had been using as a makeshift bench and finds himself sitting awkwardly on the grass. To his relief, the fly finally buzzes off. And with that, the hunt for the great animal begins anew. At this point, we must bear in mind that the following events thus far have occurred on the same day. Derek browses the library and finds the clue he's been looking for. Odette and her friends retrieve the map. And now, Derek and Bromley have begun the hunt. While all this is happening, Uberta is preparing the palace for a ball the following night.
We return to Rothbart's castle, where we see Odette swimming on the lake with speed while John Bob is standing on the turtle's back. John Bob tells the princess, "Odette, I apologize for the way I've been acting." Odette, gracious to a fault, answers sweetly, "It's all right, John Bob." No, this Derek is very important to you, insists the frog, and all I can do is think of myself. Everyone does that, reassures the Swan Princess. Please, Odette, don't make this more difficult than it already is. Accept my apology, please.
Well, look at the progress John Bob is making. After all those attempts to get Odette to kiss him, John Bob is finally learning that you can't just make a woman love you. He's learning that he shouldn't be self-centered. Look at all this character growth. Perhaps you should consider showing him some gray speckles? Speckles? You're being rather quiet.
Oh, Klingeon! This is John Bob we're talking about. You can't just let yourself be so easily gullible, my good Tesahorn friend. Replying to John Bob's apology, Odette answered, "Okay, I accept." Prepare yourself, Klingeon. John Bob nonchalantly replies, "Good, now we can kiss and make up," as he puckers his face for a kiss without a single hint of shame whatsoever. Both Speed and Odette simply address John Bob by name with reproach in their voices. John Bob innocently asks, What? What did I say? What?
Ah, you don't miss a trick, do you, John Bob? Such a pity. I guess it was all just a ploy for him to be sneaky again. I should not question your judgment when it comes to his character, Speckles.
Your vote of confidence in my judgment on this matter is most appreciated, Klingeon.
At this point, Puffin's voice rings out and commands,
Attention!
Odette's Speed spring to attention. John Bob is bucked off Speed's shell in the process and tumbles into the water. Wielding the arrow that had wounded him as a baton, Puffin struts on a log and announces, It is 0 arrow, troops. Pointing the arrow at the Swan Princess, he commands her to prepare for takeoff. After acknowledging his order, Odette swims away from Speed. While John Bob is busy climbing back onto the turtle, Puffin continues barking commands.
The rest of you have your assignments. Is everyone ready?
Ready for action, sir. Speed replies while John Bob shakes off the water.
How about you, John Bob?
Puffin asks the frog.
John Bob, continuing to act like a pretentious jerk, twists his hyper-flexible leg in order to squeeze the water out. Puffin calls his name again, but the frog continues on as if he didn't hear the bird.
Letting out a sigh of resignation, Puffin bows to the little amphibious jerk and plays up to John Bob's ego by addressing him as Highness.
I am ready.
Just look at that frog leg spin! Leave it to John Bob to lighten up at the thought of a skeptical Puffin calling him Highness just to appease his ego. Hey! By the way, what's going on with our friends here? Sir Persevere, didn't you observe earlier that Speed, Puffin, and John Bob were bandaged and looking mighty beat up after all the efforts they made in procuring the map?
I did make that statement.
Would you agree that this scene is taking place on the same day as when they retrieved the map?
The ball is to take place tomorrow night. And they also got the map the same day as when Derek was browsing the library before going hunting for the great animal again. So I would answer yes.
Okay, so they were bandaged up earlier immediately after getting the map. There is no way that they should be out of the bandages the same day as having the bandages put on them. So what's going on here? Why do we not see Speed, John Bob, and Puffin wearing bandages here?
Simply put, I think the bandages were for comedic effect rather than showing some serious damage. That's a pretty common trope in classic animation.
Very well. I suppose you have a point.
Puffin utters, "Take off!" as he dives off the log and takes a brief swim in the lake. He re-emerges from the water and takes to the air to join Odette, who has had a head start on him as she is already flying. "Good luck. Have a nice flight," bids Speed in an affable mood. What John Bob says next is yet another one of his more well-known lines.
Remember, if anything happens to her, I'll have you whipped, flogged, put on the rack, and then have your back legs fried in butter. Gracious, isn't he? But seriously though, John Bob is really getting under my nerves here. Honestly, what is tiny little John Bob going to do if something did happen to Odette? And what makes him think it's his job to do anything about it as it applies to Puffin? Klingeon, what if I threatened to turn you into glue if anything happened to Sir Persevere under your watch?
I would laugh in your face before proceeding to swish you away with my tail.
Precisely. Because I'm an insignificant little creature, and I know it. And Sir Persevere is a man who doesn't need someone like me white knighting for him. I may have a little bit of a Napoleon complex, especially if I'm speaking to unsavory characters, but I at least try to know my limits and be gracious to everyone regardless of how great or small someone is. You are a courageous salamander in spite of your small size, which is more than what can typically be said of John Bob the Frog. Oh, shucks, Aveline. Thanks!
With that line of commentary, we go back to Derek and Bromley, who are deep in the woods and upon their horses. As they dismount, Derek observes, "He's in here, Brom. I can feel it." "How will you know the great animal when you see it?" replies Bromley. "I'll know," Derek answers. Looking back over his shoulder, the prince advises, "Better stay close." After the prince turns his head forward again, Bromley runs up from behind and smacks into Derek. Chuckling nervously, Bromley replies, "If you say so." Traversing quietly through the forest, the two hunters walk through a ray of sunshine. Derek then breaks away from Bromley to go around a tree. Bromley, being absent-minded, didn't notice his liege go behind the tree. In a panic, Bromley finally notices that they have been separated and calls out, "Derek! Derek, where are you?" Derek, not wishing for the great animal to be alerted to their presence, turns and shushes his best friend.
Seriously, Bromley, you've only been separated for about 10 seconds. There's no need to panic.
"Sorry," Bromley answers the prince, relieved to see that he had made much ado about nothing. Derek rolls his eyes before proceeding to go on the prowl through the woods while Bromley ventures in the opposite direction. Bromley makes his way around a tree before finding himself confronted by a dragonfly. Stammering out Derek's name several times, Bromley readies his bow and takes aim at the insect. Ultimately, he screams for the prince in a panic and fires his arrow. Fortunately, the dragonfly zips away before it can be hit by the projectile. Bromley's arrow flies up into the forest canopy and clips a branch on its ascent.
At this point, we go back to Odette and Puffin, who are flying rather leisurely amongst the clouds. Turning to her companion, Odette observes in the spirit of caution, "We better keep an eye out for hunters."
Puffin, perhaps overconfident upon his survival skills, dismisses Odette's concern with a chuckle and says, "At ease, Odette. I can smell a human a mile away."
Leave it to Puffin to hilariously jinx himself a second later with his own overconfidence. For just as he finishes this boast, an arrow whizzes in front of him and causes some of his feathers to fly every which way. Fortunately, Puffin is unhurt, but the close call strips away his confidence and causes him to squawk in fear.
However, he is quick to regain his composure. Puffin looks down to try to see what happened. "Where did that come from?" he inquires.
It is, of course, no mystery to us as the audience as to what just happened. In fact, we know that Puffin was not the intended target. He was merely at the right place at the wrong time. For this is the arrow that just shot wide of a dragonfly.
This is the arrow that Bromley misfired into the trees by mistake?
Indeed it is. This is all confirmed when Bromley calls out, "Derek!" again, this time in the earshot of the two birds.
Hearing the name of her beloved, Odette is filled with a happy hope as she says, "Derek, he's here."
You will not lose control. You will follow the plan as outlined. Acknowledge. Acknowledge! Odette!
Seeing Puffin tumble in the air like that and end up flying upside down gets me every time.
It is pretty funny. However, he quickly regains his bearings and follows the lovesick Swan Princess into the forest below. We go back to Derek, where we see a nice animation shot of him stomping into a creek. He stands in the water while attentively listening to the birds around him. The camera pans over to a little waterfall, and I love the animation that was used to bring such beautiful artwork to life. Suddenly, a branch snaps, startling the prince and prompting him to turn around. He then quickly rolls away from the creek before standing once again on dry land with his bow at the ready. The prince looks in one direction, then the other way. The birds continue singing ominously in the background. Finally, Derek slightly relaxes his guard before continuing on his way, doubtlessly concluding that the snapping branch was just a false alarm.
In the meantime, we see Odette flying amongst the trees, still searching for her beloved. The sun shimmers upon her wings as she navigates through the sunbeams that have filtered through the treetops, making her a beautiful sight to behold. Likewise zipping through the trees is Puffin. He has lost sight of the princess and is now calling her name as he flies along.
As all this is happening, we see a frightened mouse being chased onto a stump crowned with old bark. It attempts to climb over the ring of bark, but the walls seem to be too smooth and sheer for the mouse to get a proper grip. Seeing that escape is futile, the mouse stands with its back against a wall. We soon see that the pursuer is none other than Bromley, as his shadow falls upon the rodent. The camera turns to Bromley himself, and we see him preparing to shoot an arrow at the mouse.
I've got you now. Don't give me that innocent look. Change. Go ahead, change. I'm not afraid of you,
says Bromley as he takes aim at the tiny creature. This is the part where I would usually make fun of the fact that Bromley is going after the mouse. After all, I think he was really silly to be so paranoid over the fly and dragonfly. However, I will give this lovable oaf a little bit of a pass here.
Speckles, I'm quite surprised. Why are you willing to give Bromley a little leniency when you've been rather hard on him up to this point?
We already know that Bromley isn't the brightest bulb, right?
True.
Well, when Prince Derek was explaining the concept of the great animal to Bromley just a couple scenes ago, what animal did he specifically use to illustrate his point?
I think I get what you're saying. You're right, Speckles. Of all the animals Derek could have chosen to show the transformative nature of the great animal, he used a mouse.
Right. I think although Bromley was aware that the great animal could be anything in its harmless shape, he took the idea of a mouse more seriously because that's the picture Prince Derek was showing him before they went hunting today. After Bromley gives his monologue to the mouse, the helpless rodent simply looks up at him and hiccups. That one little hiccup was enough to strike fear into the heart of Bromley. The great oaf does a little scaredy cat dance while dropping his arrow. He turns tail and runs steeper into the woods, tripping over a root as he does so. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the last we will see of Bromley for a while.
Boy, chased off screen by a hiccuping mouse. What a fate. Way to go, Bromley. Perhaps courage is not your forte after all. With that, I believe we shall conclude the second episode of this 4-part series breaking down the Swan Princess 1994. When next we return, we shall see what comes of Derek's hunting expedition and Odette's attempt to be reunited with her one true love. Both of these shall culminate and intertwine with each other to result in a thrilling chase scene. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
I really enjoyed reviewing the lyrics of Far Longer Than Forever with you, Klingeon. You are the best life partner I could have asked for. Likewise, my beloved. No matter how far apart we should ever be, I shall always hold you in my heart.
You are always a beautiful and dynamic duo to hang out with, my Tesahorn friends. To our gracious audience, we thank you for stopping by and listening to our continued breakdown and examination of this film. We hope you enjoyed this video and will join us next time when we continue with part 3. If you like our content and wish to stay tuned for the next episode which is currently in production, please consider hitting the thumbs up button, sharing this video, and subscribing to this channel. And now, my friends, go forth. Be gracious to everyone, and may God bless you.